Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm your host, Dr. Haider Shah. On behalf of Kalwas, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we have another very interesting topic, and I'm really honored to welcome and introduce our distinguished guest speaker who is going to talk about how to publish in high impact journals. Publication is in art or science. If it is in art, how can we develop it? And if it is science, then what are the organized steps to follow and do it properly? Or is it both? So you will get the best insight about all these questions because we have an expert with us in today's this session. So stay tuned because an amazing stuff are coming ahead in this session. So before we start, I would like to thank Khawaja for arranging such enlightenment sessions for their support and providing us such a wonderful platform. The aim of Khawaja is to give you the opportunity to connect and interact with world-renowned speakers, academic leaders, teachers, authors, researchers, experts, professionals, and businessmen to learn from their experiences, recommendations, suggestions, and tips which will create an impact and will enable you to learn and develop yourself in order to grow and transform individually as well as to contribute to the world in a positive way. As our slogan is come, learn, and share knowledge. So today we have an amazing person as guest. He is an internationally known and recognized speaker, having a vast experience and exposure. He is guiding the researchers around the globe through his wonderful work and through his wonderful YouTube channel. And he's a great human being. Let me introduce him formally. He completed his MA in Human Resource Management from the University of Westminster, London, and his PhD from Abbasin University, Peshawar, Pakistan. He has published over 30 research papers in high quality impact journals that include corporate social responsibility and environmental management, social indicator research, total quality management, and business excellence, Journal of Intellectual Capital, Leadership and Organizational Development Journal, Applied Research in Quality of Life, Journal of Enterprise Information Management, the Journal of Information Management, Evaluation and Program Planning, Knowledge Management Research and Practice, Journal of Knowledge Management, International Journal of Hospitality Management, International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management, and Studies in Higher Education. In addition to that, he has extensive experience in software like the SPSS, MOS, Smart PLS, etc. He has conducted several workshops both nationally and internationally on writing quality research paper, how to use the software tools for literature writing, and how to analyze data using SPSS, MOS, and Smart PLS. Last but not the least, he's a wonderful speaker, author, teacher, professional, and above everything, a great human being. So please help me in welcoming our guest, Dr. Khawaja Fawad Latif. Welcome to the Kalwas platform, and thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Saab.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. It's an honor to be here and to be on this platform. I hope this session would help the uh, the scholars learn the basic ingredients of publishing in high quality impact factor journals, and I hope I will be able to answer the questions that are in the minds of the scholars and those uh, basic elements that actually deter someone to publish in these particular journals and highlight some of the critical issues that can help them solve their issues, and something that can obviously pave the way in publishing in good quality journals.
Yeah, it's really pleasure to have you and looking forward for a wonderful stuff and recommendation you are going to share with us. So over to you, Dr. Saab. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Now, the objective of this session is to learn how to write a quality research paper or thesis that actually gets published in a good quality journal. Now, the objectives of the session are pretty long, but I'll try to cover all these during this session. Now, we'll learn how to identify research gap using papers published in high ranked journals. We'll learn what necessary information that one should store. We will learn how to write a captivating and engaging introduction with focus on structure and format of a good introduction. We'll try to identify the key elements of a literature and how to structure, format, shape a critical literature review. We'll look into how to propose and present a particular an engaging research methodology, and further gain insights into the identification of key analysis techniques that shall be used in a research study. And finally, we are going to look into the key ingredients of research discussion, identify implications, and propose limitations and future research directions. Now, before I go on and discuss in detail as to what are the critical ingredients in each of the section in a particular research paper or a research thesis, I would like to highlight why a particular research paper is rejected. Now, there are numerous reasons that one can come across and find out, okay, why was my paper rejected? Now, this is not an exhaustive list. Obviously, there could be other factors that can lead to rejection of a paper. But these are the ones that I have faced, and these are the ones that a few fellows of mine have faced. The first one, the paper failed the technical screening. That is, you had problem with plagiarism, language, format of tables and figures. Now, these days, I do not want to stereotype it, but these days journals do look for reasons to reject your paper with initial screening because they do not have time to review each and every paper. So if you are short on plagiarism, or there are issues of plagiarism, language, format of tables and figures, and you haven't followed the author guideline, you are facing a straight rejection. You might face this rejection after 3-4 weeks of submission. So if you are not looking into plagiarism, language, format, tables, and figures, you are losing 4 weeks of your time. And during this time, maybe some other journal you could have sent your work, and they could have obviously taken it in and put it in review. Now, the manuscript does not fall into the domain of the journal. This is very important. Now, if I am publishing in a journal, this does not mean that all others can publish in that same journal. You have to look into the topic that you are writing on. Now, there are ways to find the right journal, and one of the easiest way is to go on Google, type in journal finder, and you'll find the journal finders by Wiley, Elsevier, and other databases as well. The research topic isn't of great enough significance. Now, sometimes we are talking about topics that are not worth reading. They are not important, or nobody is interested in reading about them. Maybe those topics are at a very basic level. Now, sometimes you've got topics like, let's say, employee motivation affecting turnover intention. Now, these are individual level topics. These are not strong topics. You need more stronger topics. Now, what do we mean by strong topics? For example, I might be wrong, but you will not come across a journal called Journal of Motivation. You will not come across a journal called a Journal of Turnover. You will not come across a journal of, let's say, commitment or employee engagement, but you will come across journals of corporate social responsibility and environmental management. You will come across journals of intellectual capital. You will come across journal of marketing. You will come across journal of international human resource management, things like that. Journals that are focused on more organizational aspects rather than individual aspects. Yes, the individual variables are important, and you need to link your organizational factors, constructs, variables, whatever you want to name it, with the individual outcomes. So again, focus on something that has enough significance and that the reader wants to read about. Fourth, lack of clear identification of theory. Now, this is obviously something that is very debatable. What do you call a theory? Now, in my mind, a theory is not something that always ends with the word theory. Anything that is in literature is a theory as well. But more or less, the researchers, the reviewers are again focused on something that obviously explicitly mentions a theory, like social learning theory or social identification theory, or any other theory for that matter. So what is your theoretical lens? How are you going to contribute towards the theory? This is very important. Again, there is lack of clear identification of gaps and limitations. Now, once you've got lack of clear identification of limitations, you're not adding something new to the literature. You need to clearly express your gaps and limitations. Now, what happens sometimes is we only are mentioning that, okay, a further, or like, let's say, Smith 2020 recommended that this particular variable shall be taken as a mediator. Now, again, this is an identification of the gap, but it's not clear. You need to explain why is it necessary to take this particular variable as a mediator. We cannot just identify gaps and that, okay, Mr. So and so or Miss so and so mentioned that, okay, this variable needs to be studied. But we do not explain the reason behind it. And this is again very important. Again, a gap is something when you are adding something to the literature, when you are trying to find a new relationships, when you are assessing a new relationship. Maybe you are using new methodology or new type of analysis is identification of gaps as well. But if a study has been conducted in America and you are doing it in Pakistan, or maybe you are doing it even in England or Australia, well, this is replication. This is no gap. Finally, you have to clearly identify the contributions of the study in the introduction. Failure to do so, you are not actually summarizing what you intend to do. Now, these six things that are mentioned or that are these are required in the introduction. Now, this is the first thing that your reviewer or your the editor will see. Now, if he or she is satisfied with these 6 points, then only you can get your paper towards the review process. Now, if the relationships have already been tested and you're just replicating a study, well, this is no contribution, and obviously your paper will be rejected. The conceptualization and measurement are not in alignment. Let's say if I'm studying a concept of let's say university social responsibility, and I'm measuring it with, let's say, corporate social responsibility. So your conceptualization and measurement are not in alignment. There is lack of critical literature review that leads to hypothesis development. There's a lack of appropriate methodology. For example, let's say I'm conducting a study in banks and I'm interested in studying innovation in banks. Rather than measuring innovation at organizational level, I'm measuring innovation at employee level. Now, there is no innovation at branch level within the organization, or in this specific case, banks. So, your methodology is flawed because you have collected the data from the wrong people. There are flaws in the procedure, presentation, or analysis of data. For example, you have used an analysis technique that obviously it was not required. And finally, there is a lack of flow and structure in your thesis or paper. Now, all these things, obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, and others can lead to rejection of your paper. But these, according to me, are the most important points that can lead to rejection of your paper. Now, moving on, the next thing that is important here is what's the normal structure of a thesis or paper? Now, we start with the introduction. And in the introduction, we've got 6, 7 things that one should be obviously conscious of. Then we write the literature review, research methodology, data analysis and results, and finally, the discussion, conclusion, limitations, and future research directions. And the ending point is references. Now, we are going to look into all these different sections and what shall be included in each of these different sections. Now, the first thing that is very important is identification of research gaps. Now, you can search through latest research that is available in different databases. Now, it's again very important. What are you reading? Are you reading from any journal that is available? Any paper that is available on, let's say, Google Scholar? Well, if you read good, you are going to produce good. If you read well, you are going to produce well. If you're reading from any particular journal that is not peer reviewed, or the papers that were not reviewed properly or not written properly, then obviously your abilities will not grow. You will not become a good researcher. You need to read from good peer reviewed journals that are published by good databases like Emerald, Sage, Springer, Science Direct, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, Gestor, and there are others as well, Cambridge and Oxford. Now, there are two types of gaps that I have come up with during my research tenure up till now. Now, one is explicit research gap. Now, you review the introduction and you look into what has been the focus of latest research and why. Let me open just one thing, Dr. Sab. Let me open the pen because that will make the users easy to learn. Just give me a second.
Yeah, sure, please. Take your time, sir.
Because if then I can mark where I am on the screen, so it will help the scholars.
Yes.
Okay. So if like now you can see if I'm marking something on the screen.
Mm,
No.
no, it's not visible, doctor.
Okay, I think it's the software. Anyways, let me go through it. Okay.
Thank
So
you.
now what you need to do is you need to the second point is you need to read through the limitations and future research direction. Now every good paper will have identification of limitations, and then they would have identified what are the future research directions. Now you need to identify that what are those directions that you can take into account and develop your own model. Let's say I'm interested in studying about or research. I'm interested in researching about university social responsibility and organizational performance. Now you come up with a particular paper, and that then you see that okay, what are the future research directions in that paper? And they have identified, let's say, green innovation as one of the mediators between university social responsibility and organizational performance. Now you can take that particular variable as a mediator in your study. Read through systematic literature review and meta analysis. Find if that particular topic that you are interested in has any literature review, systematic literature review that has covered 10, 20 years of work. And this will save you a lot of time because you do not have to go separately for each study and look into those studies. Or you can look into meta analysis as well. And then document the identified gaps and limitations because obviously one will not remember everything that they are reading. Do not just take gaps from one single study. Now, this is very important. Let's say if I take one mediator from one study, and if I just take one mediator from one study, then the same mediator may be taken by someone else somewhere else in the world. Now, if they are able to get the data quickly and if they are able to publish it like in a quicker time than you, then obviously you are at loss. You've lost maybe 3, 4, 5 months of your work. So take gaps from multiple studies. Try to identify multiple mediators, multiple moderators from different studies. The third one is, or the other type of gaps is implicit research gap, something that is not mentioned in the existing research, the limitations and the future research directions. Now, it's not easy to come up with implicit research gap because it's not there. And it's very difficult for early career researchers to come up with implicit research gaps. So what's the solution? Normally, what I recommend is that if you want to come up with implicit research gaps, work on one particular area for at least 2 to 3 years. Now, once you keep on working on that particular topic or area or variable or concept for 3, 6 like months, 8 months, 1 year, and you publish 2 to 3 papers in that particular area, then you will automatically identify gaps. You will automatically be able to link variables with each other. You will be able to identify other concepts that may be linked with that particular concept. But again, it will come through reading. It won't come on the first day. Again, consult a subject expert. If you are not an expert, write to an expert and ask them, okay, if this is a viable topic in that particular field. And finally, probe your model. Again, this is very important. You have to identify that if you are interested in assessing, let's say, one variable x influences y, then y influences z, x influences y1, y and y1 are your mediator. Now you need to assess whether it is feasible to assess these relationships. Do these relationships make sense? Are you taking, let's say, if I'm interested in assessing the impact of x on y, is it feasible? Is it acceptable in literature whether x will influence y? Sometime you may be wrong. So try to probe your relationships and assess each relationship if the direction of relationships is right. And if those relationships can be studied in that particular sector that you are interested in assessing. Now, again, in order to document your literature review or the papers that you are reading, now it's again not an exhaustive list, but something that you can obviously come up with and put it in an Excel sheet. You start with the title of the paper, you write in the objectives, you write in the research questions and hypotheses, the theory that they have used. Again, this will give you a list of theories that have been used in existing research with a particular relationship. Now, what are the variables that they used in their study? the gaps that they addressed, so that you are not repeating or doing something that has been already done. Again, sample size and techniques that they have utilized, so you know that okay, this is a particular sample size that one can use, and the techniques that can be utilized to test this kind of model. What were the respondents and what were their results? Now this results, or these results, will help you write your discussion section. And finally, what were their limitations and future research direction or directions? This will help you build your own model. Moving on. Now, in the introduction section, obviously, that's the first section that is obviously viewed by your reader. But again, this is one of the last thing that you should write in your research paper. You should always start with your literature review. It's pretty simple. I cannot introduce someone if I do not know that particular someone. How are you going to introduce your variables to the reader if you are not sure about your variables, if you do not know about your variables? So it's very important that one starts with the literature review, structures the literature review, writes the literature review, and then comes towards, or then gets to the introduction section. And you start your introduction section in a thesis or in a paper with the value of your topic, the need to study that particular topic. Now you start with the value of the topic in general. Let's say why this particular topic needs to be studied. And then the second point is, if you are focusing on one particular field or any particular field, then you highlight the need of that topic in that particular field or area as to why this particular topic shall be studied in that particular field. Following that, you should write about existing research on the variables that you are taking and what relationships have been studied. Once you have identified, okay, these relationships have been studied, the fourth point is you have to identify the limitations, gaps, and future research directions on your topic based on previous studies. Now, do not mention gaps that were, like, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Well, they don't make sense. Now, again, there is a contradiction here. Okay, this contradiction is obviously visible in one of my works as well, whereby I wrote a paper in 2020 and I gave the gaps and limitations from a work in 2015. And during those 5 years, there was no work that linked the two concepts. Actually, I'm referring to one of my paper on corporate social responsibility and team outcomes. The last paper that was written was in 2015, and my paper was published in 2020 or 2019. So there was no paper in between. Now, in this case, I couldn't find a paper. I searched a lot of journals, a lot of databases, but I couldn't find one. So there was no study in between. Does this mean that that particular topic wasn't important? Well, it could be so. Or does this mean that nobody was interested in working on it or nobody thought of working on it? Well, it could be any reason as long as you can justify the gaps. Again, referring to my earlier point, it's not that just mentioning that, okay, this is a particular gap in research. More important is that you explain that why this particular gap needs to be addressed, why these relationships shall be studied as mentioned in the next point. What's the need? Justify your gaps. And the sixth point is the theoretical lens. What theory are you going to use to explain the proposed relationships? Now, a number of times I get this question of, let's say, how many theories shall we use? Well, obviously, it should not be like you mix anything that you have. You cannot have, let's say, 5-6 theories to explain your model. Obviously, it doesn't look well. It looks like you've just come up with the model one way or the other, and there is no there is no solid reasoning behind your model. For me, it's just around 2 at most, or 3, not more than 3. I prefer 2, obviously. 1 is always better. Now, then your contributions to the body of knowledge. What are your contribution? And now those contribution obviously shall be in light of the limitations and gaps that you have identified. Your gaps cannot be North Pole and your contributions cannot be South Pole. Your contributions shall complement your limitations. And finally, the proposed structure of your thesis or paper. Now, again, I've come up with examples for each of these 8 points. So I'm going to quickly go through these. The slides will be shared by Dr. Heather, or they will be available on my website as well. So you start with value of your topic in general. So again, let's say I'm interested in corporate social responsibility. So I may start with corporate social responsibility has become a business imperative. According to the Business for Social Responsibility in 2000, they mentioned that CSR is operating business in a manner that meets or exceeds the ethical, legal, commercial, and public expectations. Now, once you have identified the value of the topic in general, you can obviously identify the value of the topic in that particular field or area which you are focusing on. Why is there a need to study this particular concept in a particular area? Let's say in this example, what I focused on servant leadership. Now, research on servant leadership has primarily focused on business organizations with relatively scarce research in context of higher education institutions. HEIs are faced with increased complexity, scarcity of resources, fierce competition for ranking and prestige. Servant leadership has a significant utility in HEIs where primary function is provision or service to develop people. And leadership in the educational institutions is massively challenging as leaders are faced with tough decisions pertinent to budgetary cuts, freezing praises, or programs elimination. Now, this particular paragraph, 5, 6 lines, highlight the value of servant leadership in higher education institutions. Following this, existing research, as I mentioned, this is the third point. Now, the empirical research revealed inconclusive findings with regards to the impact of CSR on organizational performance. Now, again, it's not obviously feasible just to write that, okay, this is the limitation or there are inconclusive findings. Now, you have to give examples of those inconclusive findings as well. Just the way you have to justify your gaps, this is one way to justify your gaps. You have to explain the limitations or inconclusive findings in existing research. In this case, I've given an example between CSR and OP, whereby some found it positive, where others said that it's negative or there is no association between the two. Now, limitations, gaps, future research directions that are to be based on previous studies. They must be latest. Obviously, one should try the most. Although the interest in EL, that is entrepreneurial leadership in this case, has been growing, the concept of EL is still significantly underdeveloped. Now, I've mentioned 3 to 4 gaps here. The paper was published somewhere in 2018, so gaps are pretty latest. The various parts of leadership literature have yet to permeate the field of entrepreneurship. Again, the latest gap. And finally, the theoretical lens. The theoretical lens for the study is knowledge based view. Okay, again, it's very important that you just do not mention that, okay, this is your theoretical lens. You have to briefly explain the theory. You have to briefly put in, okay, this is what this theory means. And this is what we do next, that which argues that organizations are social entities that use and store internal knowledge, competencies, and capabilities that are vital for the firm's survival, growth, and success. KBV has been used extensively in the KM literature. And finally, your research contributions. Again, you start with identifying, okay, the research aims to assess the interrelationship between servant leadership, career satisfaction, and life satisfaction across 3 different countries, that is Spain, China, and Pakistan. And in doing so, makes important contributions. Now, do not just mention contributions as a paragraph. Identify them, although it is a paragraph, but identify them as first, second, third. Bullet points are not required. You just number them in the form of text, maybe. So first, this study contributes to the field of leadership across cultures. Second, assess the mediating role of career satisfaction between these relationships. Third, no previous study proposes a cross-cultural research of leadership in higher education institution. And why this is important? Again, it helps managers of these institutions to lead in a global context to discover an effective leadership of each culture. And finally, the study would add to leader member exchange. Now, what is your contribution to the theory? It's not just enough that you mention that, okay, this is my theory. You have to explain the contribution to that theory. Now, contribution to that theory is very simple in writing. It's not a rocket science, so it's not just like very difficult to write. If you are proposing a new relationship and you are explaining that relationship in light of a particular theory, you just have to mention that in writing. That's it. Put it in words. The study would add to leader member exchange theory by ascertaining the role of leadership in shaping career and life satisfaction. So, I'm explaining the role of servant leadership in shaping career and life satisfaction, and I'm explaining these relationships based on leader member exchange theory. These three lines will explain to the reader that this is my contribution to the theory. As simple as that. So again, this is the proposed structure of your thesis. Again, we start with the introduction and then methodology and, literature review, then methodology, discussion and all. Now, this is another important section of our paper or thesis, the literature review. Now, the purpose of literature review obviously is to help a researcher build on the work of others and make informed decisions during the various stages of the research project. A review of the literature identifies and highlights relevant themes and documents significant findings, frameworks, and or instruments from earlier research that will serve as the foundation for the current project. Now, again, one important thing that I would like to identify here is that when you are reading your literature review, make it critical. Now, what do we mean by critical literature review? Now, critical literature review means when you compare and contrast the findings of different researchers. When you try to identify the definitions that are more acceptable in your context than any other context. And one important thing here is I mentioned about instruments. Now, when you are searching the literature review, it will give you an idea as to what instruments, what measures, what questionnaires have been used in existing research to measure a particular concept. Now, which one is feasible for you? Again, this will give you a clear idea as to can you go for, let's say, a multi-dimensional scale, or a single or unidimensional scale is enough. How many items shall you have? Like, if we are using SCM, my opinion is, again, a lot of things that I say here during this session, a number of researchers may disagree with it. But again, obviously, you should listen to your supervisor as well. My opinion is that you should use SCM because SCM you are knowledgeable about the topic, individual or independent discussion on variables. So, for example, let's say I'm interested in studying the relationship between servant leadership, career satisfaction, and life satisfaction. Now, career satisfaction in this case is my mediator, and my independent variable is servant leadership, and my dependent variable is life satisfaction. So what I can do is first I may write about servant leadership, then I'll create another section and I write about career satisfaction, and then I may write about life satisfaction. And the next section could be I start to establish the relationship between these variables. So what do I write about when I'm discussing the variables at individual level? So you start with the concept of the variable. What is this variable all about? And again, if you are focusing on a particular area, you should write about it, or is there any conceptualization of the variable in that area? For example, I'm interested in writing about servant leadership. So there is a concept of servant leadership in general. And then is there a conceptualization of servant leadership with respect to higher education? So I'm going to write about that as well. And again, this is just not enough. You need to write about what does this variable do for the organization? How does it facilitate their working? Why is this particular variable important for this type of organization? Why studying the concept is important in your field of study? Now discuss the general consequences. If it is a predictor variable, and if it is a criterion variable, why studying the antecedents is important in your field of study? The status of literature, is it limited? And what are the limitations of that particular concept? Now, what are the common measurements of the variable? Now, again, and the sixth point obviously is not required, or you cannot write about it, all these points in a paper. Obviously in a thesis you've got much more space, so all these things can fit in. So what are the common measurements of the variable? What are the common dimensions, and which one are you using? Are you going to use a unidimensional scale or a multidimensional scale? Why a unidimensional scale? Why not a multidimensional scale? Well, obviously we do not write about these things in a paper because we've got limited space. But if you're writing a thesis, I strongly encourage students to write about these things so that they know why a particular variable shall be measured in a particular manner. And finally, what conceptualization, operational definition are you going to use in your study? Now, does your conceptualization reflect in the instrument or measurement you are using? Normally, what happens is we first select the measurement and then we define the concept. Well, this is totally wrong. First, define the concept based on your study area. Or if you are not focusing on a particular area, you can just define it and see if that particular conceptualization fits the respondents or the type of respondents you are going to focus on. And why use a conceptualization? Is this very close to your area of study? Moving on, again, some examples. So you start with the concept of variable definitions. Now I've got a paper here, a reference paper that one can look into. And then if there is a conceptualization of the variable in the area of the study. Let's say Esfinjani and others in 2013, they defined USR as a concept whereby a university integrates all of its functions and activities. Now, the focus of my study was on social responsibility, and specifically I focused on the social responsibility of the university. So there was a conceptualization of social responsibility in universities, so I put it in my paper. Again, what conceptualization, operational definition are you using? So CSR in the present study is based on the instrument by Magnan and Farrell, who noted that, okay, this is the definition of the CSR that I'm going to use in my study. And I use the same scale by Magnan and Farrell in this study as well. So again, your measurement should be complemented by the type of conceptualization you have, or rather your measurement should complement the conceptualization. And again, what does the variable do for organization? Now, it's not just enough to define the variable unless or until you explain the value of that particular concept that you are focusing on. So I'm focusing on, let's say, the quality of internal services is closely related to the company's overall performance. Now, according to service profit chain perspective, the achievement of internal customer employee satisfaction is the basis for achieving excellent external. Why shall I study about internal services? Why should I study about internal marketing? Because it leads to external marketing. So these are the type of arguments that highlight the need to study that particular variable. Moving on, why studying the concept is important in the field of study. Now, if you are focusing on a particular field, then you can give an argument as well that literature suggests. Now, here is an example. The literature suggests that higher education began its most recent focus on quality improvement efforts during the 1990s. Why quality is important in higher education? Now, this particular paragraph highlights that particular motivation to study quality in higher education. So all these things are very important if you are focusing on individual discussion of variable. And what's the status of the variable? Is it limited? And what are the limitations? Let's say Six Sigma methodology I'm going to use, and the limitation is yet relatively little empirical research has been conducted systematically and extensively to identify the key quality dimensions of purchasing's internal service, particularly from the perspective of purchasing internal customer. Now, again, it's very difficult for everyone to write about all these things in a research paper. But at least in a in a research paper, it's difficult. But in thesis, obviously, you've got space. But if you are writing a research paper, at least focus on three things: the conceptualization, and if there is a conceptualization or importance identified in that particular area, and finally, why studying that particular topic is important. Now, these three important ingredients shall not be missed when you are doing an individual or independent discussion on your variables. Again, the measurement. Okay, so what measures I'm going to use? The key to knowing whether quality improvement approaches and techniques have been successful is through performance measurement of key operational and financial metrics. This is one of the examples. Again, you have to be very cautious. What are you going to be cautious about? Your literature should not look like annotated bibliography, but rather a story where ideas, concepts are linked. Your literature should not look like, okay, X said this, Y said this, so I'm saying this. So if everything has been said by someone, what's your contribution? So you have to be very cautious as to what you are writing in your literature. Do not just copy and paste it. Think of it in light of the gaps that you are going to fill in. Now, sometimes we are proposing gaps and then we are negating our gaps in literature review because we are saying that, okay, this study has been done and these were the results. But in the introduction, we have mentioned that we are the first one or the second one to do that study. But in the literature, we have mentioned so much detail about that particular relationship that we start to negate what we have mentioned as gap in the introduction. So be very cautious about it. Do not hide the facts. Again, remember the paper that you are sending to a journal, and if that is a quality journal, the reviewers are of quality as well. And they, for example, if my expertise are in social responsibility and leadership, I'm not going to get a paper on, let's say, uh, earning per shares or earning management. I'm only going to get papers on those two topics. And now I know that topic in and out. So if you are going to mention to me that this topic or these variables or these concepts have not been linked by anyone, it's very simple for me. Just go to Google Scholar, typing those two variables, and I'll get to know, and I'll simply reject the paper. And this is what we do. That's what we are obviously asked to do. So be very cautious when you are obviously finding the gaps. And then you are trying to write about. Invest your time in finding the gaps. The least amount of time that we are investing is finding the gaps, and the most amount of time we are investing is doing analysis or maybe data collection, whereby most of us of the time shall be invested in finding the gaps, the right gaps, and reading. The more you read, the easier it becomes for you to write, and the lesser time it takes you to write. And that's my opinion. Another again, so how do you write when you are developing a framework? Again, when you have mentioned the variables individually that we obviously looked into the ingredients of it, the next thing is you have to establish the relationship between variables. So what are the 3, 4, 5, 6 points that one should be cautious of when they are writing about developing a framework or trying to establish the relationship between variables or proposing their hypothesis in simple? Have the previous studies linked the two concepts? If yes, what were their findings? Now, if they have linked it, why are you going to study it? What's the point of you doing it? Now, this is very important. Again, if you are studying it because there are obviously the findings are not unanimous and they are contradictory, then you should mention that they are contradictory and mention the reference to those studies as well. Why studying this linkage between variables is important? Why studying the linkage between variables is significant if you are focusing on a particular area of study? Again, there is one very important point here that one should not miss. Let's say if I'm so much inclined on writing about, or if you are following the presentation now, you would see that I'm obviously inclined on testing new relationships. And I've been talking about, like, okay, if these relationships have been tested, there is no point of you doing that particular research. So if I'm focusing on too much on studying new relationships, where is my literature? Now you have to build your argument. If there is no research on a particular relationship, but based on your own knowledge that you have acquired over the years by reading or going through the school to the university to by doing PhD, and after PhD you've been teaching in class or reading books, there's a certain state of mind that we understand that, okay, two concepts are actually related, but we need an argument to build. But if there is no direct argument, let's say if I'm interested in studying about servant leadership and sustainable development goals. Now, it might be that there is no research on how servant leadership can affect sustainable development goals. But it makes sense that servant leadership can help an organization improve its sustainable goals or achieve its sustainable development goals. So, how am I going to link these two concepts? I'm going to use a theory to link these concepts. I'm going to divide servant leadership, identify what makes servant leadership. I'm going to divide sustainable development goals and identify what makes up sustainable development goals. And then I can lead or link the dimensions of one variable with the other variable. And this can help me build an argument. So the dimension traits of independent variable, link them to dependent variable, and use theory to develop the linkages. I might share one or two of my papers with Dr. Heather, and he'll share the titles with you, that can help you identify how to develop these linkages using theory when there is no existing research on the two concepts. Moving on, as the previous studies link the two concepts, now these are just examples, so I'm going to quickly go through them. Let's say the first one, findings further support the idea presented by Garriga and Emil. Their study, which involved a review of all 52 earlier surveys about the correlation between CSR and company performance, showed that more socially responsible companies have stronger economic results. So, yes, there has been research on CSR and performance, and the existing research has shown that, yes, there is a relationship. Now, are these like, or are the variables in any way linked to each other? Were the findings contradictory? Studies on the relationship between market orientation and innovativeness have produced contradictory results. So you have to identify if there are any contradictory results. And this obviously gives stimulus to your argument that there are, obviously, the findings are not conclusive and there is need for further research as well. Now, why studying the variables or the linkage between variables is important? Now, by addressing these important questions, internal suppliers can understand or what service areas they should concentrate on, effectively improve their internal service quality, on internal customer satisfaction, while avoiding the investment of much money and other resources in providing service quality dimension that may not pay off. So why studying these relationship is important? What's the outcome of these relationship on the organization, or what are the consequences for the field that you are interested in? Okay, if you are focusing on a particular area, obviously, again, you should mention why studying this relationship is important for that particular area. Again, all these things can be easily identified if you are reading papers. And finally, how to write, how the independent variables affects, influences the impacts. Now, again, it's not just enough to mention that, okay, these two variables have been linked and these are contradictory results. You have to explain how the variables influence each other. A slight detail of the mechanism of impact will make your literature review more critical. Again, if there is no direct relationship that you can find, obviously, as mentioned earlier, identify the dimension, traits, characteristics of your independent variable and link it with the dimension, traits of the dependent variable if there is no direct link available. Now, this is called how you build an argument. Again, use the theory to develop the relationship. Now, according to KBV, knowledge is created, stored, and utilized by individuals and not by organizations as a whole. Coordinating and integrating the knowledge held by individual is a difficult task. This can be made possible when an organization has knowledge experts in managerial position. Now, in this particular concept, what we did was, in one of our papers, we linked entrepreneurial leadership with knowledge management, whereby before us, or like before this study, there was no study that linked entrepreneurial leadership with knowledge management. So first what we did was we defined what is knowledge management and who can improve the knowledge within the organization. So it's the managers, it's the leaders. And then we linked it to knowledge oriented leadership. So this is how you build your argument using theory. The next section, research methodology. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. You start with the population, then you mention the sample size and sampling technique. Again, there's much debate on what the sample size should be and what sampling technique should be. My opinion, obviously, sometimes differ with the other researchers. I do not have any strict opinion about using which or whatever sampling technique, as long as you can justify it. I am strong proponent of any sampling technique as long as you are making a significant contribution to existing research. It can be probability sampling technique, it can be non-probability sampling technique. For me, more important is using the right kind of methodology and making contribution to existing research rather than focusing too much on what kind of sampling technique am I using, as long as it is the right, it's used rightfully, and there is a proper justification as to which technique you are using. How did you distribute the questionnaires? You should mention your questionnaire sources as well, and if you are using secondary sources, mention them as well. How did you collect the data? How did you analyze the data? Again, if it's a regression, if it's the research, or if it's a research on finance and economics, you should mention your regression model as well. Again, this list is not exhaustive. I would strongly recommend you to read research methodology in your area, and maybe you can add more to it. Data analysis and results. You start with your descriptive statistics, reliability, convergent and discriminant validity if you are using questionnaire survey based research, hypothesis testing, and summary. Now, again, if your field changes, let's say you are focusing on too much on secondary data, or you are in the field of finance and economics, obviously this list may change. And again, one of the most important sections, the discussion section. And one area that we give least of our attention to, and sometimes the whole discussion section is actually missing in the research paper. And if you do not have a discussion section, how are you going to do your research? The whole thing is that you are doing your research for the sake of better understanding as to how to solve the problem. So you identified the problem. You obviously developed literature about that problem. You collected the data, you analyzed the data, but you didn't discuss how to solve or how this problem was solved. So you need to write or you need to have a more stronger discussion section. Now, I've published in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, ABS 2-star, 3-star. I haven't got to 4-star, hopefully soon. Now, one thing that I would like to highlight here, the more like top journals that you go to and you're submitting the papers to the top journals, maybe 3-star, the more they are focused on your discussion section. And this is, in my opinion, I've noticed this in my past few publications that I did with top quality journals. They're not like putting in things on my introduction as to, okay, you did not mention your gaps clearly. Now, if my paper is going towards the review process, obviously there are enough gaps. Obviously, my methodology would be sound enough. The reviewers were inclined on two things. One was, how am I presenting my literature review? Is it critical enough? Is it provide sound theoretical footings to my hypothesis or whatever I'm proposing? And the second thing, most of the times I used to get strong suggestions to improve the discussion section. So if you want to publish in high quality journals, you obviously, other than focusing, obviously not taking anything away from the introduction, your discussion section should be very, very strong. So you start your discussion with writing the objective of your study as to, okay, obviously this recap, so provide a very sound recap as to what your research intends to do. So provide a brief purpose of your study, of an overall objective of your study, the rationale for your study, whatever you want to call it. Now, again, moving on, how your results compare to the results from previous research. Now, do not mix your hypothesis. Be very clear, have very concise description of what you intend to do. So start with, okay, what your hypothesis was, and then whether or not it was supported. Again, this is not enough. Just the comparison of your study with previous studies is not enough. Again, this is an initial essential ingredient, but this is a necessary ingredient, not a sufficient one. So your results supported hypothesis 1, and this is consistent with previous studies. Recent calls have been made within the internal marketing literature for research that utilizes the functions of internal marketing to better improve. Okay, this is what the comparison is all about. Again, why a certain relationship may be significant or insignificant in your research. You need to explain that, okay, if a relationship was significant, why was it? If it was insignificant, why? So internal marketing concept improves customer satisfaction by creating employee satisfaction. This obviously relates to the how of your literature review that we mentioned earlier. You need to explain how a particular relationship obviously stems out, or how one variable stimulates changes in another variable. And this can help you explain why your research or why a certain relationship was found significant in your study. Now, if you found insignificant relationships, then you need to explain why this relationship was insignificant. Now, this is tricky. So, how do you get out of this situation? Again, discussion has got one important thing. Discussion gives you that space to provide your own opinion as well. Obviously, it has to be logical. If it's not logical, then obviously it doesn't make sense. And again, in my opinion, if it's logical, it does not require a reference. Not everything will have a reference. Again, there could be a contradiction about my opinion on this. So, and I'll give you an example from one of my own papers where we did give an argument without any reference, but it was logical and it was accepted by the reviewers, and the paper at the end of the day was published. So, what does the insignificance and significance and insignificance of relationship show in your study? So, if the relationship was significant, how does it help your study? How does it help the field of your study? And if it was insignificant, what does it mean for your study? Does it mean that okay, the variables are not important, or there is need to further research because obviously your insignificance may be contradicting existing research? Again, use the theory. Whatever results you have found, link it with existing research, or rather the existing theory, whether your results are contradicting an existing theory or they are in alignment with an existing theory. A significant relationship between CSR and team commitment align with social identity theory. As an organization, social activities give its employees a sense of belonging. Now, this is an explanation as to why this relationship was significant in light of this theory. So, if you understand clearly throughout this presentation, my focus was on, rather than just describing the what aspect as to what you are doing, you have to explain how and why you are doing it. If your results are significant, why? If your results are insignificant, why? So I was referring to an example. I think this was the last. Okay, let's go through this slides and then I'm going to give you that example. Finally, write the conclusion that obviously shall be based on your research objectives. Mention the limitations of your study in terms of the sample that you obviously collected, the data collection procedure, maybe measurement and analysis. Now, are there any conceptual limitations? And then mention your future research directions. For example, maybe a new analytical technique that one should use, maybe in another culture that the research shall be conducted in, or the conceptual scope, maybe in some new variables. Now, this is what I am interested in, finding new variables from existing research. And finally, again, very important, the implications. How does your research benefit the individuals, the management, and organization? What are the policy implications? What are the theoretical implications? Again, all these three implications are important in your research. So strongly focus on all these points. Again, I guess this is the end of my presentation on how to write quality research. I would just like to give you that example that I was quoting earlier. So we wrote a paper, me and some professor in Spain, back in 2018. Now the paper was on servant leadership and life satisfaction. And we were expecting that the impact of servant leadership on life satisfaction would be positive. When the results came through, it was a negative relationship. And then again, obviously, we expected a positive relationship, and the results were negative. So there was an opinion that, okay, let's go and collect more data, maybe do it again as well. But then obviously, we decided not to do it. And we decided on focusing on how we are going to justify this negative relationship, whereby in the paper all along, we've been focusing on positive relationship. Now, what happens is, and then we discussed and we came up with this argument that when there is servant leadership in the organization, servant leadership means that you are focusing too much on your followers. You are giving 100% for your followers. You are trying to develop them, grow them, be ethical, be honest, help them in whatever possible manner that a leader can. Now, what happens is that in such scenario, The follower obviously may have to compromise on his own life situation in order to help the leader. And this obviously has a negative impact on the life satisfaction of the leader. Oh, sorry, the follower. Hence, there was a negative relationship between the two. So we just gave this explanation without any reference in the discussion section because it was logical, so it was accepted. Not every time you will have a reference, but in the discussion section, you've got that space to write based on your own arguments that you have built earlier. But again, this does not mean that you can write whatever you want. They have to be logical arguments. With this, I end this presentation. I hope the quick review of what should be included in a research paper would help the research scholars identify the critical ingredients of a good research paper and thesis. Dr. Saab, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much. Superb session. It was the way you were explaining, Dr. Fawad was so great. I was just looking the pattern, the way you articulated, and the way you have gathered your slides were so nice, and that speaks for your excellence and your command on the subject. And I love the way you started it right from the rejection reasons why the paper are rejected first, so that we know the reasons first, and then the format of a thesis and paper, and then very nicely you have connected each and every dot very nicely, that you presented the introduction, and I love the way you explained the introduction, the gap, the contribution, and how it is important and how does it translate to the contribution. And I love one of your analogy that for going for a review process, the introduction part is very important, and then you linked back to the process of discussion, that actual reviewers, they would focus on the discussion part more, that whatever the argument you have developed through your literature review, through your gaps, now how you are going to propose solution for that. And now this way you bridge the gap, that what you have said initially in introduction, and then the conclusion part, what you are coming up with the new solution and how do you propose the solution. Really, Dr. Saab, it was so great. I was just looking at different papers which you were giving the examples of your own papers, and you were quoting it, and you were making it so simple for our audience who are watching from around the globe and who will be watching in future. This is going to be a very thorough and I would say a brief session for them as well, because the things you were explaining, I could recall when I was doing my PhD, and even now when I'm writing the paper for Q1 journal, Q2 journal, these kind of comments we get what you were referring to, that how you are going to talk about the theoretical lens and how it supports your model and what you are going to contribute, and the discussion part, significance, insignificant results, so what. And I love the three parts of you, that what you are doing is not that important, how you are doing and why you are doing it. I think you are selecting the words to communicate and to convey the message is so precise and so nice, so great. Really, Dr. Fawad, as expected, the session was so great. And I knew because I have watched your several videos, and which is so great. And the same way you explain here as well. So, congratulations. Our purpose is solved and our purpose is served, that yes, you communicated to them and you made it very easy for them. And let me just quote it, that we learned through hard ways, but we are making things easy for the upcoming researcher. And I am sure that you have learned through very difficult procedures, and now you are making it very easy for the people. And I think that's the fantastic job you are doing. Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure. I'm glad that you liked the session. I hope the audience would have liked the sessions as well, and they liked the session as well. And again, I hope the objective is served. So thank you very much. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much. And if you allow, should we start with the first question, please?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Sure.
Dr. Fawad, the question is very much, I would say, practical, and they want to have your personal opinion on that. They want to say that Dr. Fawad, thank you very much for such a wonderful session. Please, would you like to share with us what problem did you face initially while publishing? Please share with us how did you overcome those issues? Yes, please.
Okay, now it's a there's a kind of funny answer to it as well. And the first paper that I wrote, the email that I got was obviously the paper was rejected, and the way that the review letter was framed, it was like the reviewer would have liked to come over and beat me to hell, and would have asked me not to write ever again. The whole point is that I've gone through rejection like hundreds of times. I was still. I guess a week ago, two of my papers were rejected. So it does not mean that if I'm teaching someone, I won't get any rejections. We all get rejections. Now, how do I overcome it? That's the important question. The essence of publishing in good journals is reading. Now, having said that, just reading is not enough. You have to complement your reading with the use of different tools and techniques. You should know how to read, what to read, when to read, where to read. You cannot read hundreds of papers. You cannot read maybe let's hundreds of papers and document everything. Obviously, that's impossible. One cannot do that. So the whole essence of it is that reading with objectivity. Again, reading with clear identification of what you intend to or use it, or how do you intend to use it. Now, to complement your reading, you should know different softwares that you can later use. For example, you should know how to use Google Scholar properly. Now we are using Google Scholar all wrong. You should know other softwares like Mendeley, how to use it. You should know how to use, let's say, QDA Minor Lite. So once you know that, okay, this is the structure of the paper and these are the ingredients, so this is what needs to be written, and you know how to write it, then you should know how to extract the information. Rather than just knowing, okay, what to read and what are the critical ingredients, and if you do not know how to extract that information, then it's obviously useless. So the more you read, the more you understand these things, and the more you have grip over these tools that I've already mentioned, the more you are able to write them properly. Again, just simple reading is not enough. You have to complement it with other tools, and that obviously that are there and available. But again, for me, if it's one single sentence that covers how was I able to cover for all those rejections, or how I was able to publish, again the essence is reading. Quality reading is the essence to publication for me.
Wow, very nice. And this is what we say, quality in, quality out. That if you read
Agreed.
the quality work, that would translate into the quality work as well. And Dr. Fawad, another question is somehow related to the first question as well, but this student has insisted a lot to ask this question from you. That Dr. Fawad, please tell us about yourself, from where you got the inspiration for publishing and writing in so good journals. Yes, please.
Okay, so well, I work at a university in Pakistan. It's called COMSATS. The name is COMSATS University. Now, there is a culture for publication. Again, you are required to publish if you obviously let's put it in simple manners. If you want to continue to work, so if you have to work, you have to publish. So I was obviously forced to publish, and it was something that was forced onto me. So I obviously for that reason I had to publish. So I started reading, and alhamdulillah I was able to publish. Again, and the motivation is there are two different motivations to it. First, family. Obviously, you have to, whatever we do, we do it for our families as well. And secondly, obviously, I wanted to learn these things because I wanted to contribute back to like, if I'm getting paid for something, and they were paying me for publication, they hired obviously PhDs for publications. So obviously that was part of my job. So again, you have to give something back to your university or your institution as well. So obviously when you, and again, the point is, uh, if you want to do it, and if you are serious about it, then only you will be able to do it. If it's not forced onto you in one way or the other, and if you are not interested in doing it, then obviously you won't be able to do it. Now, I was forced earlier to do it, and now I do it for, let's say, maybe continuation or sustaining my abilities, or not to get what do you call it, like um, rust, get rusted. So that's the reason now I do it. Obviously, I do not do it like, let's say, previously I used to publish good number of journals every year, publish good numbers of papers every year, but now I'm just like focusing on maybe one paper or two papers a year, just not to get rusted. But still, again, if you are just interested in doing it, then you might not be able to do it. If there has to be a certain amount of force, or maybe something that you see as a negative consequence, maybe a motivation that can obviously keep you going, not just a positive motivation. Obviously there should be, let's say, a negative consequence that keeps you motivated. So obviously these things at the end of the day worked for me, and I was able to publish.
Wow, very nice answer. And that reminds me another story, Dr. Fawad. I was doing a session with the Prof. Ramaya from Malaysia, the academic leader, one of the big name in academia. And he was sharing the same story, and he was saying that I didn't know about the publication, etc. But I was told that if you want promotion, you have to publish. And from there, he started, and he just talked about the how can one start from the scratch, and then how can he become the academic leader, because he's leading the world. He's one of the top researcher as well. And the same analogy I found in you as well, because you shared the same thing, that how did you start your journey of research and publication. Very nice. There is one another interesting question which you just talked about in your presentation right now. I want to ask that, Dr. Fawad, which one is more important? You mentioned about the ABS star and the impact factor and the journal quartile Q1, Q2, Q3. Which one you prefer, the impact factor or Q1, Q2, 3? Which database you would like to prefer? Yes, please.
Okay, now there is no objective answer to it. It's pretty subjective. Now it depends on where you are obviously working. Let's say if I'm working in Pakistan they prefer impact factor journals. Let's say if you're working in Australia, New Zealand, they prefer ABDC list. And now if you're working, let's say, in America, South America, North America, they've got their own list, but they prefer quartiles 1 and 2. So it depends like that. But currently now my focus has changed. Now previously I was focused too much on impact factor journals, but now I do not focus too much on impact factor journal. For now my focus is on publishing in journals that obviously make my work readable, because I'm not just going to publish. Okay, if it's an impact factor and nobody reads it, well, there's no point in publishing. But obviously these things will change with time. Previously I was focused on too much on impact factor journals, but now my focus is on making my work more readable. The more people read about my work, the more they are reading of about what I'm writing. That is what more important is. Now it can be obviously an emerging citation index journal, or it can be an impact factor journal, or it can be any other outlet. But again, uh, please try to publish in good databases, as I mentioned in my presentation, those that are obviously Emerald, Sage, Springer, Science Direct, and Taylor and Francis, Wiley, Oxford, Cambridge. These are good outlets that obviously you should always focus on. Or any journal in Scopus is obviously good as well. So anything that is in Scopus and master journalist is fine, and it obviously is a good outlet to publish.
Wow, very nice. Once again, you have given wonderful message as well through this way. Another interesting question, Dr. Fawad, they want to ask that please guide us. Is it appropriate to cite an article which has been retracted? Yes, please.
Okay, so if an article is retracted and you cite that article, obviously nobody goes into the detail of, okay, these were the articles and how many were retracted, or if a particular article was retracted. But again, obviously try to obviously follow the good ethical way. And if an article was retracted, it could be obviously due to different reasons, so then do not cite it, just to be safe, on a safer side. But in my opinion, it doesn't matter. The reviewer is not going to look into which articles were retracted at anyway. But again, it's a good idea not to do it, just to be on a safer side.
Wow, very nice. Again, it's a wonderful answer to this question because they say that to be on safe side, avoid the retracted papers because the reviewer might get offended and do not accept your argument. Very nice. There is one another question by the another student, and they want to ask that what is the difference between the significance of research and contribution? Sometimes the students are very confused with this kind of questions. Yes, please.
Okay, now my opinion may differ with others. For me, there is no significance of research. It's either the contribution or either implication. Now, you will not come across this word significance in research papers. You will either come across the word of words contribution. Now, if you are talking about contributions, they are mentioned in the introduction section. Now, once you have completed your research, how is your research? Obviously, what are the implications of your findings towards the theory that is part of your discussion section? Now, significance in terms is more like implications in your research. So, implications of your research at individual level, managerial level, organizational level, the policy implications. In other terms, if you want to use a synonym, that is significance, but avoid
Mm.
using a word that is not obviously used in existing research papers. So if you, to the best of my knowledge, if you look at research papers, you will not come across the word significance. You will come across the word contribution in the introduction, and then you will come across the word implications in the discussion. Now that implication in other way is actually significance of your research at those levels, plus how is your research significance for or how is your research significant for theory. But they do not use those words, they use the words, the other words. So try to use the words that are obviously still being used in existing research, rather than creating your or coining your own terminologies that are obviously confusing.
Wow, very nice. Thank you very much. And last two questions. I know we have limited time. So the question is, Dr. Fawad, please guide us. Does the corresponding author profile matters while publication? Yes, please.
No, it doesn't. A number of times I get this same thing, that I'm writing with someone, and these days I'm writing with, like, let's say I wrote a paper quite some time ago, and now that author has said that, okay, you are going to submit the paper. I said, well, it doesn't matter. They are not going to look at my profile before reading my work. In my opinion, it does not matter. But again, it's a subjective kind of answer. Some say that it does matter, some say it doesn't. Well, in my opinion, it does not matter if you are working or like publishing a paper from Pakistan. It doesn't matter if you are a corresponding author from US, England, let's say Australia, Canada, New Zealand, or Pakistan. Doesn't matter. I
Mhm.
was able to publish based on the quality of my work. I wasn't able to publish because I had some professor. I've got papers in good quality journals whereby I was the single author. Nobody was with me. If that would have been the case, my paper should have been rejected. But those were not rejected; those were accepted. And most of the papers, I'm like maybe first author, second author, and someone else is a corresponding author, and he didn't had any publications before our papers were submitted. So in my opinion, it does not matter. That's my opinion.
Mm. Wow, very nice. Once again, you have discouraged this notion that please make the corresponding author the person who has a great profile, and then your paper acceptance will be the chances would be quite more. So it doesn't depend upon the corresponding author. Rather, which you have mentioned is very right. The quality of your research work matters, and that speaks for itself. The last question, Dr. Fawad, they want to ask that please share your opinion on merits and demerits of journal publications under the special issue. Yes, please.
Okay, well, special issue, there are no demerits. If you are publishing in those journals or those databases that I've mentioned, they won't just take in your paper because it's linked. It's a very obviously it's related to the concept that they are publishing in. Your paper will be reviewed, it will go through that process, but obviously that process will be time bound. The only advantage for me in publishing in special issue is that there is a time to it. So they've got given 6 months, and they will follow their deadlines. Now you're not the only one who is obviously witnessing or looking at that special issue. There is whole world looking at that special issue, and they are publishing in those special issues. So again, if you are publishing in a special issue and people say that, okay, well, it's not valued, well, they are wrong. If you are publishing in a special issue by International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management, or International Journal of Hospitality Management, or Journal of Knowledge Management, or Intellectual Capital, or these journals, well, obviously it's not that you, since they have got a special issue and you are submitting and then they're just sitting there to get your paper and publish it. Well, that's not the case. Still, it goes through the process, and again, there are no demerits according to me. Publishing in these journals is obviously is a good thing, and obviously if it's a special issue, so be it. It doesn't matter. Most of the journals have special issues these days, and they sometimes they've got consecutive special issues coming in and no regular issue maybe. So it doesn't matter. So just to avoid these kind of negativity towards research and publication, come up with good work, publish it, no matter whatever kind of publication it is, be it special issue or non-special issue, doesn't matter to me. And obviously this is my opinion again on it.
Yeah, very nice. Really, Dr. Fawad, I enjoyed this session with you. The way you are giving answer is so great. But since time limitation, we have to wrap up. But really, I enjoyed, and it was so wonderful session with you. And you can see in comment section, they have commented a lot, and they said that we learned through your videos. And I was watching one of the comment which mentioned that I published just because of your videos were so valuable, and they like you so much because of your humbleness and your kindness as well. I think that's the real contribution, and the people like your channel and your research work. That's the wonderful part. uh, Dr. Fawad, at the end of the session, we asked our each guest about their message to the world. So, what is your message to the world as a speaker, author, teacher, researcher, trainer, learner, professional, and educator? Yes, please.
Well, I do not have much to say, but the thing is, it's with regards to this topic of today, I would like to say that everything takes time. Do not rush into it. Give it time. Again, the essence of it is learning how to read, what to read, when to read, and again, complement it with the tools as well. So do not rush into it. The only problem that we have when we are publishing is we want to publish in, let's say, 1 month or 2 months. It takes time. The first paper that I wrote took me around 1.5 years to get it published, and the review process took 1 year, and then again the other process and everything, it took 1.5 years. And then I had time when it took 2 months to publish as well, or 3 months maybe. Again, the essence of publication is reading, and finally, do not rush into it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Wow, Dr. Fawad, what a nice message you have given to the world. And this is what you are explaining to our audience throughout your experiences, which you have gathered in a wonderful way. And I would say that to the audience that please do follow our distinguished guest speaker through his research work, and you can email him for future learning and guidance. He is very generous and always ready to help the people. Moreover, wonderful explanation and powerful content which the great speaker has already elaborated will help you to learn and develop your understanding regarding how to publish in high impact journals. So take advantage of all the information, important tips, and suggestions shared by an expert. You can learn more about all his research work through his YouTube channel, which is Research with Fawad. And that's all we have time for today. Thank you once again, Dr. Khawaja Fawad Latif. And I
Thank
would
you.
like, yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to thank our audience who joined us. Thank you all for your support and liking our session. Stay tuned as many sessions are on the way. Please do not miss any session. At the next session, take care of yourself. Bye bye.